Well, it's 5:45, and I'm waiting here in the parking lot for Chris to show up. Today we've decided that we're going to pretend we have little bikes, and we're going to trailer to a brand new area that we've never, well, brand new for us, the Limerick Forest. So for this ride, I've got a brand new DO 606 in the rear, and this is a narrower 130 series tire that I'm running on a narrowed 17-inch rear rim from Woody's Wheel Works. And up in the front, I'm trying out for the first time an MT21, and we'll see how that goes. Now, in order to ride in the Limerick Forest, you have to be a member of the OFTR or the ODSC, so we have our little stickers here. And we also renewed this year with the Fédération Québécoise des Motos Hors Route, because those are the guys doing all the lobbying for off-road motorcyclists in Quebec. While waiting for Chris, I took a moment to look at my truck and trailer, which Henrik calls the Big Shiny. And then I heard the distinctive sound of Chris's HP2 with that nice acro pipe. Good morning.
Morning. Did you bring coffee?
No, it was closed.
Darn it.
Have to do a highway stop. Here, let's strap this fucker in. We had an uneventful ride to the Limerick Forest, which is about 2 hours away from my house. Now, we didn't realize it at the time, but the Ontario Federation of Trail Riders and the Bytown Motorcycle Association had organized an event there. So we actually ended up signing up. You may have noticed that on the right-hand side of Chris's bike, he's got this honking big Light Force driving light from Australia, and we had installed that on Chris's bike because he had recently done the Paris to Dakar rally, which is another local event. And that is not the Paris-Dakar, obviously. The Paris-Dakar runs from Paris, Ontario to Dakar, Ontario, and is a really hard event. I think you do something like 800 kilometers in one day, and a lot of it is really gnarly off-road stuff. And Chris's team didn't quite finish, but we'll have a video about that coming up in the future. Now, because there was an organized ride here, we wouldn't be needing our GPSs, which was a good thing because my old 276 Garmin was acting up. And you'll notice all of these arrows, and there was 3 different difficulty levels, if I remember correctly. And we would be following the orange route, which was kind of the medium route, and we would be trying to stay away from the pink route. Here I'm turning off my ABS because on that last little downhill, I scared the crap out of myself. When we registered for this event, we got quite a few strange looks because we were the only idiots on big bikes. There was a few 650s in the lot, but mainly they were real trail bikes, smaller KTMs, and a lot of the bikes weren't even licensed for street use. The planned routes were going to be real single track with tons of really tight switchbacks. And then there were these forest roads like you see here, which were much better suited to the big bikes. But the vast majority of the time we'd be stuck in the woods on these really tight trails, weaving between trees. This section here was actually quite a bit wider than most of the trails we'd get to later.
I feel like my tire's flat.
Chris stopped to check his front tire. He thought it was a little low, but I think it was just that last section of trail where the ground was really spongy in that pine forest.
Yeah, we might have soft. That was fun. A little tight, but... Okay, so...
I had my ABS on that first downhill.
Oh, that's why I was wondering why you were stopping. Go this way.
I made it quite exciting.
Okay.
This section of trail is what most of the trails are like in the Limerick Forest, pretty tight. Now normally on a big bike you can go just a little bit slower and pretty much go anywhere you want to go. But on this really tight stuff, the problem is that you have to be pretty accurate with where you're putting the bike. There's lots of spots here where the handlebars just fit, so you don't have that leeway to let the big bike kind of wander all over the place. So it is a lot more fatiguing because you really have to kind of muscle the bike to keep it precisely on line. While if you're driving down a gravel road, you can let the thing wander a foot left, a foot right. Here, 6 inches too far to one side and you're smacking the handlebars. The Limerick Forest is what they call a multi-use trail system. So you might have people in here on mountain bikes, even horses, people walking. There's some of the non-single track trails are used by people on ATVs, and as such, you've got to kind of be a little conscious of the other trail users. The Ontario Federation of Trail Riders and the Bytown Motorcycle Association, the Ontario Dual Sport Club. There's also another riding club in the Simcoe area. They do a lot of lobbying and hard work to make these areas accessible to motorcycles, which is why we all need to sign up and give them some of our hard-earned cash. It's also why we need to keep our bikes quiet and slow down near other trail users. These guys spend a lot of time and energy dealing with municipal, federal, all different types of levels of government, but if you blast by a family hiking at 100 kilometers an hour, spraying them with rocks with an incredibly loud exhaust, you can bet those people are going to be complaining and trails get closed. The Limerick Forest has about 40 kilometers of this tight single track stuff, as well as about another 40 kilometers of the forest road type trails. So even though the area of the park itself, of the forest itself, is not very big, they've crammed a lot of riding in there. So it's a really nice spot. I mentioned earlier that we were pretending we had little bikes when we threw them on the trailer. I know some folks are really against trailering, but I'm at an age now and I've ridden for enough years where buzzing down the highway for 2 hours one way, wearing down my fresh knobbies, isn't actually that exciting. Of course, the downside of trailering is that you always have to end up where you started, and for most of our rides, that would be really limiting, since we like the freedom to wander and follow whatever route strikes our fancy. Today we knew we had at least 4 hours of highway, so we suffered in air-conditioned comfort
while sipping our coffees. Anytime we got back out onto the actual roads was a nice break where you could actually sit down and take a little bit of a rest. A lot of the actual ground was sandy in spots too. So in a few sections you had the nice tight trails compounded with the fact that you were kind of riding in this loose sandy soil. I imagine this would be a real handful on a big bike if it had been wet.
That way. Oh, go that way. We'll catch up.
Let's back up that footage a little bit. As you can see, Chris has missed the turn, and we are now on the pink route. Our little foray on the pink route was going fine till we came to this one steep little climb, and the F800 ran out of ground clearance.
Yep. I just bottomed.
Oh, you did?
I just hit it with the skid plate and I stopped.
It's tiring on the upper body.
Holy, my arms, I had to sit down. Alright, let's get out of here before those guys get here. Okay, it's on my foot. Okay, good. Alright, clutch her in, let's roll her down. It ain't going up that hill. I think the pink is going to be too much for this 800. Swinger, left, yeah. There we go. I think we're going to have to go all the way down, Bill. Swinger right, yeah. Whoa. Uh-oh, hold on. I think you better get on there, Bill. Yeah. This is not good. Maybe you can go left up there.
I thought it might be a good idea if Chris rode it up this section. At least if the bike got high-centered on that same obstacle, his long legs would reach the ground. But it was just too steep and the ground was too soft, and we gave up on that idea.
We're dug a hole, Bill. Yeah, I think it's lay it on her side and drag her. Yeah. Well, you can try. No, 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 no. It's buried, chain's buried.
Sometimes we found the easiest way to turn a bike around in tight quarters is just drop it on the ground and spin it on the crash bars.
Hold on, let's not injure ourselves here. Okay, go. Yeah.
Now I've got a very good tip for you guys who like going off-roading on big bikes. Try to find some guy who's 6'3", maybe 6'4", and 10 years younger than you, and bring him with you.
Okay.
After that, we decided we'd head back to the truck and take a little break. After our little break, we headed back out on the trails. And at this point, I'd become separated from Chris. He was keeping a bit better pace through here. Don't think he was quite as tired as I was. So when I popped out onto the road here, I wasn't quite sure if he had continued following the trail or not. And then I saw him up ahead.
I don't know where it is.
Huh?
My GPS point pointed right back, like right here.
Oh, to the turn. So it's got to be up here along this road.
Yeah, I don't know.
Follow the road till we hit
But
it.
it's got to end up in there somewhere.
Now this was much more suited to the big bikes. You could actually sit down for a little bit, which was nice. And I was keeping a bit farther back here because Chris was chucking up a little bit of dust and I didn't feel like eating it. There were quite a few other riders out and about, and a lot of these routes crisscrossed, so we were also being a bit cautious because we weren't sure if someone was just going to pop out of the woods in front of us at any moment. And I gotta say, one of the nice things about having a broken GPS is you can just sit back and relax and let somebody else do all the worrying.
What do you want to try?
Just go down here this way.
At this point, I don't even think we were on one of the designated routes. We decided just to explore the forest a little bit, and in doing so we could keep to some of the wider tracks.
Oh, Chris. All right.
There had been a fallen tree, and I guess people had kind of created this little bypass here.
You want to do this?
Might as well take the trail that's marked to the right then.
Around.
There were not a lot of huge elevation ups and downs in the forest, but some of these little things here that they don't it looks like we're basically driving around on perfectly flat ground. There was some pretty nice but short little uphills and downhills. In a few spots, you actually had to lean the bike either left or right to clear the handguards so you didn't smack into one of these little trees. This was actually one of the tighter sections that we ended up doing. And then what did I see? Chris tossed the HP2 down on the ground.
Are you all right, sir?
Yeah.
You okay?
Yeah.
Need some help?
Hello. Yeah.
And one thing you'll notice on these rides is that anytime you bump into anybody on the trail, they're always willing to lend a hand. Everybody's in a good mood, and if you want to talk to someone about their bike, any piece of equipment they may have, you can just walk right over to them and start talking. And it's an incredibly friendly and open milieu. So if you can find something like this near where you ride, you're tired of riding alone, you don't know where to have access to good trails, a lot of places, you do a little research, you'll find out there's some sort of organization that puts together these kind of events.
A sand pit. Not the gravel pit, but an actual sand pit. I don't know if there is one. I'm not sure where it is. Okay. All right. Yeah, there's a gravel pit. Yeah, that's it, eh? Okay.
So Chris decided to try and grab some local intel. He was under the impression there was an actual sand pit somewhere around here, but I don't think there was.
Okay. All right. Okay, cool. Have fun.
Chris eventually routed us on to a quite nice section of Forest Road, and here we could actually notch up a few gears, and even though it was sandy, you had enough width on the trail that it didn't really matter if the bike did a little wiggling. You kind of aimed to keep it between the ditches, and if it wanted to squirm around, that was fine. There was enough leeway on the sides, you weren't worried about smacking your hands on the trees. But all good things must come to an end, and within short order we were back on the single track. And at our slow pace, it was still doable on the big bikes. I mean, that's one of the beauties of these big bikes. Even though we trailered it this day, we could have easily done the 200-kilometer ride on the highway at 110 kilometers an hour to the trail, and then done the single track and the rest of the trails. And that's one of the compromises you have to make. I mean, yes, we could have had 350cc KTMs or something, but then what are you going to do? Spend 2 hours each way riding a 350 on the highway, or you're forced to trailer the bike everywhere you go. And we've just found with our style of riding, trailering the bikes to most places is just so limiting in that you ride for 2 or 3 hours in one direction, and maybe you're only half an hour from home, but oh yeah, I gotta go back and get my truck and trailer, so now I gotta backtrack. So, you know, for events, we frequently trailer to an event, but for our usual Sunday wanderings, we still like to have a bike that's capable of blasting down the highway as well as playing in the woods. A little while later, we were both getting tired again. Me probably a little more than Chris was, so we decided to head back to the gravel pit where the vehicles were parked, and luckily Chris's GPS was working, so he was once again leading the way. Now, some of these people had really nice setups with tents and chairs and coolers, but we were kind of novices at this, so we hadn't actually brought too much comfort equipment with us. At the morning briefing, one of the organizers had mentioned that he had a KTM 350 that he was willing to let other people try out.
There's no neutral light. It's a real dirt bike. That's the stop. That's the go.
All right.
And best just pulling the clutch if you don't know whether you're neutral or not. Let's stop if you're not neutral. Oh yeah, no gas to start.
Okay.
Camera's on?
Yep.
I'll record this. I'm gonna be with you.
So after that intensive briefing on how to operate this KTM 350 single cylinder, off I went. Now, one of the things I don't go to a lot of these events because you have to have more of a time commitment, but you really do get the feeling there's a whole crew at both the OFTR and in Quebec at the guys from Moto Trail Aventure and Ride Aventure that go to an event, it seems, almost every couple of weeks. So if you have the luxury of being able to spend an entire weekend riding, then certainly around Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto area, there's lots of organized events. But let's get back to the KTM. Now this bike was set up for someone who was quite a bit shorter than I am, so I'm a little hunched over. As far as bikes goes, this KTM 350 is probably about as different as you can get from my 800. It's single cylinder, fuel injected. I'm actually not riding the street legal version, the EXC. I don't remember the model number for this one, but it's pretty much the same bike minus a few bits and bobbles. And the first thing that struck me was how much power this thing had. I mean, this is a 350, and I never really felt that it was lacking power. And the throttle control, given the fact that it's a small bike with a relatively light flywheel and it's fuel injected, was excellent. So KTM had certainly sorted this bike out, and I'd read a lot of reviews, and certainly the bike lived up to the hype. It was really hard for me to appreciate the handling, as the riding position was just so wrong for me. I could certainly feel, once we got back into the tight stuff, how nimble this bike was and how well it tracked. I mean, this really is a dirt bike, and the EXC is really just a street legal dirt bike. I also have to say, I can't believe that once again how much power this 350 single had. It was incredible. Not to say it's that big bike effortless power, and yeah, you do have to rev it up a little more than I'm sure Chris is revving up his HP2. But this is not some anemic little micro bike. I mean, this thing was it was a pretty amazing little machine. And then, just as I thought I was getting the hang of it, I somehow lost the front end and put her down.
Good. I'm bent over so far. Like, the handlebars are so low on this thing.
And luckily, considering it wasn't my bike, there was no damage to the machine.
That'll be a good shot.
And I only realized when I was watching the footage afterwards that I just basically picked up this bike with one hand without even breaking a sweat. So yeah, I could see there'd be quite a few perks to owning a much smaller bike. And now, if you listen to the engine here, you can hear, you know, in a lot of these switchbacks here, I'm not exactly revving the crap out of this motor. I'm lugging it. I mean, I'm probably not using the engine anywhere near its capacity, but this motor would just pull from those low RPMs. It was really impressive. Even without the bike fitting me properly, it was just so much less work on the single track. And I guess losing 200 plus pounds of bike can do that. Here you can see Chris struggling up the short sandy climb. And then it was my turn on the 350, and I kind of botched it here and almost came to a complete stop, and then just got on the gas, and that little bike just chewed its way up there. It was amazing. It was an interesting bike. It was fun, but it was too buzzy and cramped, I think, for the riding we usually do, and I can't imagine riding for an hour on the highway on this thing. If I was ever going to get a smaller bike, it certainly wouldn't be this one. It's just too small. I guess if you lived in the woods or wanted a plated motocross bike. But for the kind of mix of dirt and traveling we do, I don't think it would work. I did a short little blast down a gravel road as we were on our way back to the start point, and it kind of confirmed what I'd figured out in the woods. This would be a fantastic trail bike but I can't imagine this being an adventure touring bike in any way, shape, or form. It's just way too small and way too buzzy and frantic for that kind of use. But if I lived in a perfect world and I had 10 motorcycles sitting in the garage, this might be one of them. Chris, meanwhile, was still out on the trail on the HP2, riding with a bunch of guys he'd met that morning. It wasn't long before another rider pulled up in front of Chris and motioned for him to stop and have a little chat. And that's a pretty common thing. Everybody's very curious about that quirky BMW of his. It's kind of a shame that they stopped production and development of that model. It never was a big seller. They only produced it for, I think, 1 year, and the bike was in the $20,000+ range here in Canada. And you had to be really tall just to touch the ground. So I think the market was pretty limited for that model. Quite a few of these events are kid-friendly, and all day long we saw very happy little kids zipping around on miniature motorcycles. After I brought the KTM back, it was Chris's turn to take it for a spin. Now, if you thought I looked silly on it, you can imagine how well it fit Chris at 6'4" or so. Chris headed out and this time decided to take one of the pink routes. Chris always has trouble on smaller bikes. I think he's used to the slower steering and the big, incredible low-end torque of the 1200. The small bikes also don't carry as much momentum, so you actually have to use the gas to get over obstacles. Chris decided to put the bike down on the ground just for a minute. I think he just wanted to see how much easier it was to pick up than the HP2. I spoke to Chris after he got the bike back to its rightful owner, and he too was pretty impressed with how powerful the 350 was. I think the riding position was just so out of whack for him. He really couldn't even stand up. I mean, here you see him, he's sitting, just because even with his gorilla arms, he was having a hard time bending over far enough to grab the bars. I mean, it is such a different type of riding to be riding this than his other bike that I'm sure, given enough time, he'd get into the swing of it. But he's been riding the HP2 for 3 years now, and I think he's just very comfortable with the way that bike does what it does. The Limerick Forest is not too far from Montreal or Ottawa, and you should definitely check it out. I mean, it's not a huge area, but if you like the tight, twisty single track, it's certainly worth the trip. I'd like to thank the Ontario Federation of Trail Riders and the Bytown Motorcycle Association for organizing this event and for all the hard work they do at the federal, provincial, and municipal levels to keep trails accessible and to open new areas for us to ride in. In a lot of people's eyes, off-road motorcycling isn't the most popular sport, but these groups have just made incredible headway by letting all levels of government know that people who ride these motorcycles are citizens and taxpayers and have a right to use land for something they enjoy just as much as other land users, And thankfully we live in a country, I think, that's big enough that there's enough space for all users to have a little corner that they can do what they want to do. I mean, certainly if you're a hiker and you don't want to be running into motorcycles, there's lots of places you can hike where motorcycles aren't allowed. Here, I think Chris is starting to get into the swing of riding that 350. Of course, we did see throughout the day that when we came across an experienced rider on one of these small bikes, they just flew past us like we were standing still. I mean, those guys were just cooking through these sections probably 3 times faster than we would. In the About section right underneath the video, I'll put in a bunch of links for the Ontario Federation of Trail Rider, the Bytown Motorcycle Association, the Ontario Dual Sport Club, so you can check out some of those links. If you like this video, please take 2 seconds and hit the like button. You can subscribe, and then you'll get notified of any new videos that are coming up. You can also reach us, and there is a fair bit of interesting discussion sometimes over on our Facebook page. I'll put that link below as well. With that, so ends another very small adventure of the Awesome Players Off-Road Motorcycle Club. And no, we didn't get home by noon. We got home around 2. Come on, Chris, get those shifts right, buddy. There we go.